Jordan's heart stopped when he saw the figure in the shadows, eyes glowing like twin embers in the dusk. He'd been warned about the cliffs of Havenport, Massachusetts, whispers of old magic, of things that didn't belong in the modern world. But nothing could have prepared him for Ezra, the man who would unravel his life with a single, electrifying touch. It was a crisp October evening, the kind where the air smelled of salt and secrets. Jordan, a 25-year-old graphic designer with a penchant for adventure, had moved to Havenport to escape the monotony of Boston's city grind. His new apartment overlooked the Atlantic, its waves a constant reminder of the vast, untamed world beyond. He'd heard the rumors about Havenport's haunted cliffs, but as a skeptic, he dismissed them as small-town folklore. That was until he met Ezra at the local coffee shop, the Cauldron's Brew, on a rainy afternoon. Ezra was impossible to ignore. At 27, he carried an air of quiet intensity, jet black hair falling just above his piercing blue eyes, a jawline sharp enough to cut glass, and a smile that felt like it could rewrite your soul. He wore a black leather jacket that hugged his lean frame, and when their hands brushed as he handed Jordan his latte, a spark, literal and electric, shot through Jordan's fingers. "Careful," Ezra said, his voice low and teasing. "You don't know what you're touching." Jordan laughed it off, but the heat in his cheeks betrayed him. They talked for hours that day, the conversation flowing as easily as the tide. Ezra was a historian, he said, researching Havenport's colonial past. His knowledge was encyclopedic, his passion infectious. By the time they parted, Jordan was smitten, and when Ezra asked him to meet again at the cliffs for a sunset walk, Jordan didn't hesitate. The cliffs were a jagged silhouette against the orange sky when Jordan arrived. Ezra was already there, standing at the edge, his silhouette framed by the dying light. "You came," Ezra said, his voice carrying a weight Jordan couldn't place. They walked along the rocky path, the wind tugging at their clothes, and Jordan felt an inexplicable pull toward Ezra, like gravity, but warmer, more dangerous. When Ezra reached for his hand, Jordan didn't pull away. Their fingers laced together, and for a moment, the world was just the two of them, the ocean's roar and the fading sun. But then Jordan saw it, a faint shimmer in the air around Ezra, like heat rising from pavement. "What was that?" he asked, half laughing, half uneasy. Ezra's smile faltered, his eyes darting to the side. "Just the light," he said, but his grip tightened. Jordan wanted to believe him, but the shimmer lingered in his mind, a question mark that refused to fade. Over the next few weeks, their connection deepened. Ezra was charming, attentive, and effortlessly romantic. He'd show up at Jordan's apartment with wildflowers he'd picked from the cliffs, or they'd spend nights at Ezra's loft, a cluttered space filled with ancient books and strange artifacts. Jordan noticed the oddities, candles that flickered without wind, a leather-bound journal Ezra quickly hid when Jordan got too close. But he chalked it up to Ezra's eccentricities. Love, he told himself, was about embracing the quirks. Yet, the quirks grew harder to ignore. One night, as they lay tangled in Ezra's bed, Jordan woke to find Ezra standing at the window, muttering words in a language Jordan didn't recognize. The air around him pulsed with that same strange shimmer, now tinged with violet. "Ezra," Jordan whispered, his voice trembling. Ezra spun around, his eyes wide, almost glowing. "Go back to sleep," he said sharply, but there was fear in his voice, not anger. Jordan couldn't let it go. The next morning, he pressed Ezra for answers. "What's going on with you? The lights, the muttering, what are you hiding?" Ezra's face darkened, and for the first time, Jordan saw something cold in his eyes. "You wouldn't understand," Ezra said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And you're better off not knowing." But Jordan wasn't one to back down. He'd fallen hard for Ezra, and the idea of secrets between them felt like a betrayal. "If you care about me, you'll tell me," he said, his voice steady despite the knot in his chest. Ezra hesitated, then sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Fine," he said, "but once you know, there's no going back." Ezra led Jordan to a hidden cove beneath the cliffs, a place where the rocks formed a natural amphitheater. The air was thick with salt and something else, something ancient. Ezra raised his hand, and the air around it crackled, a faint purple glow forming intricate patterns. Jordan's breath caught. "I'm a warlock," Ezra said, his voice steady but laced with pain. I was born with this power, and I've spent my life trying to control it. Jordan's mind reeled. Magic? Warlocks? It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel, yet the evidence was right in front of him. He wanted to laugh, to run, but Ezra's eyes held him in place, vulnerable, pleading. I didn't want to drag you into this, Ezra said, but I couldn't stay away from you. Jordan's heart pounded. He should have been terrified, but all he could think about was the man standing before him. The man who'd made him feel alive in a way he hadn't in years. I'm not going anywhere, Jordan said, stepping closer. But you need to tell me everything. Ezra's story poured out like a confession. He came from a lineage of warlocks, a secret society that had existed in Havenport for centuries. Their magic was tied to the cliffs, a source of power that both sustained and cursed them. But there was a catch. The magic demanded sacrifice. Ezra's family had paid a steep price. His mother had vanished when he was a child, and his father had died under mysterious circumstances. The power protects us, Ezra said, but it also destroys us. Jordan listened, his mind a whirlwind of awe and fear. He wanted to believe they could navigate this together, that love could conquer the darkness Ezra carried. But as they stood in the cove, the wind howling around them, Jordan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Something was watching them, something that wasn't human. That night, Jordan couldn't sleep. He lay in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, Ezra's words echoing in his mind. He'd fallen for a warlock, a man whose life was steeped in secrets and danger. And yet, he couldn't walk away. Not yet. As the moon hung low over Havenport, Jordan made a choice. He'd stay by Ezra's side, no matter what came next. But deep down, he knew this was only the beginning, and the shadows were closing in. Jordan's mornings began with Ezra now, each dawn a mix of warmth and unease. They'd sit on the balcony of Jordan's apartment, sipping coffee as the Atlantic churned below, but the weight of Ezra's confession lingered like fog. Jordan wanted to believe love could bridge the gap between their worlds, but the shadows in Ezra's eyes told a different story. Over the next few weeks, Jordan threw himself into understanding Ezra's world. Ezra was cautious, revealing his magic in small doses, lighting a candle with a flick of his wrist, summoning a breeze to rustle the pages of his ancient books. Each display was mesmerizing, but Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that Ezra was holding back. There's more, isn't there? Jordan asked one evening, as they walked through Havenport's cobblestone streets. Ezra's jaw tightened. You're not ready, he said, his voice clipped. Jordan's frustration grew. He wasn't a fragile thing to be protected. He was all in, or so he thought. But Ezra's secrecy was a wall between them, and Jordan hated walls. One night, after Ezra dodged another question about his past, Jordan snapped. If you don't trust me, what are we even doing? He demanded, his voice echoing in Ezra's loft. Ezra's face softened, but his words were sharp. You think this is about trust? I'm trying to keep you safe. Safe from what? Jordan pressed. Ezra hesitated, then led him to a locked cabinet in the corner of the loft. Inside was a collection of artifacts, amulets, daggers, and a crystal that pulsed with a sickly green light. These are relics of my family's magic, Ezra said, and they're tied to something bigger, something dangerous. He explained that the warlocks of Havenport were bound to a pact, a ritual that kept their power in check. But someone, or something, was breaking that pact. There's a darkness out there, Ezra said, his voice low, and it's coming for me. Jordan's stomach twisted. He wanted to dismiss it as superstition, but the fear in Ezra's eyes was real. That night, they made a pact of their own. Jordan would help Ezra uncover the truth, no matter the cost. It was a promise born of love, but also of defiance. Jordan refused to let fear dictate their future. Their search led them to Havenport's oldest library, a Gothic structure that smelled of dust and secrets. Ezra pored over ancient texts, while Jordan scoured public records for clues about the town's history. They discovered references to a Crimson Covenant, a ritual that bound the warlocks to the cliff's power. But the records hinted at a betrayal, a warlock who had defied the covenant centuries ago, unleashing a curse that still lingered. As they dug deeper, strange things began to happen. Jordan noticed shadows moving in his peripheral vision, shapes that vanished when he turned. At night, he dreamed of a figure cloaked in red, its voice a hiss that promised ruin. Ezra grew more withdrawn, his magic flaring unpredictably. One night, as they researched in the library, a book fell from a shelf, opening to a page with a single word scrawled in red ink: "Run." Jordan's heart raced. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. Ezra's face was pale. "It means we're getting close," he said, "and someone doesn't like it." They decided to confront the mystery head-on. Ezra took Jordan to an abandoned lighthouse on the edge of town, a place he said was a focal point for the cliff's magic. The air inside was heavy, charged with an energy that made Jordan's skin prickle. Ezra traced symbols on the floor, his hands glowing with that familiar purple light. "This is a warding spell," he explained. "It'll protect us while we search for answers." But as Ezra chanted, the air grew colder. The lighthouse shook, and a voice, not Ezra's, echoed through the walls. "You cannot hide," it said, low and guttural. Jordan grabbed Ezra's arm, his pulse pounding. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Ezra's eyes were wide, his hands trembling. "It's here," he said. "The darkness I told you about." Before Jordan could respond, the windows shattered, and a gust of wind extinguished the candles. In the darkness, Jordan felt something brush against him, cold, malevolent. He shouted for Ezra, but the warlock was already moving, his hands glowing brighter as he chanted louder. The air pulsed with energy, and for a moment, the presence retreated. They stumbled outside, gasping for breath. Ezra's face was ashen, his eyes haunted. "I should have told you sooner," he said, his voice breaking. "The darkness, it's not just after me. It's after anyone I care about." Jordan's heart sank. He'd wanted answers, but now he was entangled in something far bigger and far more dangerous than he'd imagined. Yet, as he looked at Ezra, trembling but resolute, Jordan knew he couldn't walk away. "We'll face it together," he said, his voice firm despite the fear clawing at his chest. As they drove back to town, the lighthouse loomed in the rearview mirror, its silhouette a stark reminder of the battle ahead. Jordan gripped Ezra's hand, their fingers intertwined like a lifeline. Love had brought them here, but it was courage that would carry them forward, or doom them both. The lighthouse incident left Jordan shaken, but it also steeled his resolve. He wasn't just fighting for Ezra's love now. He was fighting for their survival. Every glance at Ezra, every fleeting touch, was a reminder of what was at stake, a future they might never have if the darkness won. Havenport's autumn deepened, the leaves turning blood red as if mirroring the tension in Jordan's life. He and Ezra spent their days unraveling the Crimson Covenant's secrets, piecing together fragments of history from dusty tomes and whispered legends. They learned that the Covenant wasn't just a ritual. It was a prison, binding a malevolent entity to the cliffs. A warlock named Silas had broken the Covenant in 1692, seeking power beyond his birthright. His betrayal had unleashed the entity, and now, centuries later, it was stirring again. Ezra's magic was growing erratic. At night, Jordan would catch him staring at the cliffs, his hands glowing faintly, as if drawn to something unseen. "It's calling to me," Ezra admitted one evening, his voice barely audible over the crashing waves. "It knows I'm trying to stop it." Jordan wanted to comfort him, but the weight of Ezra's words pressed against his chest. Their investigation led them to a recluse named Marianne, a former warlock who'd abandoned her powers decades ago. She lived in a crumbling cottage on the outskirts of town, surrounded by wards carved into the walls. Marianne was in her 60s, her silver hair wild, her eyes sharp with a survivor's instinct. "You're fools to meddle with the Covenant," she warned, her voice raspy. "The entity feeds on warlock blood, and it's hungry." She told them about the ritual to reinforce the Covenant, a dangerous spell requiring 3 warlocks and a sacrifice of power. "You'll lose a piece of yourself," Marianne said, her gaze fixed on Ezra. "And if you fail, it'll take everything." Jordan's stomach churned, but Ezra's jaw was set. "I don't have a choice," he said. "It's my family's legacy." Marianne agreed to help, but only if they found the 3rd warlock. "There's one left in Havenport," she said. "Caleb. But he's dangerous. He turned his back on the Covenant years ago." Jordan didn't like the sound of Caleb, but they had no other leads. Finding Caleb was no easy task. He lived off the grid, in a cabin deep in the woods. When they finally tracked him down, Jordan was struck by his presence. Tall, rugged, with dark curls and a scar across his cheek that only added to his dangerous allure. Caleb was in his early 30s, his green eyes cold and calculating. "I don't do magic anymore," he said, slamming the door in their faces. But Jordan noticed the wards on Caleb's cabin, identical to Mary Ann's. He was hiding something. Ezra pleaded with Caleb, revealing the entity's growing power. "It's not just about me," Ezra said. "It's about everyone in Havenport." Caleb's expression softened, but only slightly. "You don't know what you're asking," he said. "The last time I used magic, people died." Jordan's heart sank, but he refused to give up. He spent hours talking to Caleb, sharing stories of his life with Ezra, the love that had pulled him into this mess. "I know you're scared," Jordan said, "but we need you. Ezra needs you." Caleb's resolve cracked, and after a long silence, he agreed to help, for a price. "I want out of Havenport," he said. "When this is over, you get me a new life." With Caleb on board, they began preparing for the ritual. Mary Ann taught Ezra and Caleb the incantations, while Jordan felt increasingly like an outsider. He wasn't a warlock, but he refused to be useless. He spent hours researching the entity, piecing together its weaknesses from old texts. It thrived on fear, he learned, but it faltered in the face of unity. As the ritual's date approached, the entity grew bolder. Jordan woke to find his apartment covered in strange symbols, etched into the walls as if by an invisible hand. Ezra's nightmares worsened, and one night, Jordan found him levitating above the bed, his eyes glowing red. "Ezra!" Jordan shouted, pulling him down. Ezra woke, gasping, his body trembling. "It's inside me," he whispered. "I can feel it." Jordan held him, his heart breaking. He wanted to protect Ezra, to shield him from the darkness, but he was powerless against magic. All he could do was love him, fiercely and unapologetically. "We'll get through this," Jordan said, kissing Ezra's forehead. "I'm not losing you." But the entity wasn't done. On the eve of the ritual, Jordan was alone in his apartment when the lights flickered out. The air grew heavy, and that same guttural voice from the lighthouse filled the room. "He belongs to me," it hissed. Jordan's blood ran cold, but he stood his ground. "You can't have him," he shouted into the darkness. The voice laughed, and then the world went black. When Jordan came to, he was lying on the cold floor of his apartment, the symbols on the walls glowing faintly. His head throbbed, but his first thought was Ezra. He stumbled to his phone, dialing Ezra's number with shaking hands. No answer. Panic surged through him as he grabbed his jacket and ran to Ezra's loft. The loft was in chaos. Books strewn across the floor, artifacts shattered. Ezra was slumped in a corner, his face pale, his hands glowing faintly as if fighting an invisible force. "Jordan," he gasped, his voice weak. "It's stronger than I thought." Jordan knelt beside him, his heart racing. "What happened?" he demanded. Ezra's eyes were haunted. "It tried to take me. I fought it off, but it's not done." Jordan helped Ezra to his feet, their hands clasped tightly. They couldn't wait any longer. The ritual had to happen now. They drove to Mary Ann's cottage, where Caleb was already waiting. The air was thick with tension as Mary Ann laid out the ritual's components. A circle of salt, 3 amulets, and a chant that would bind their power to the cliffs. "If we fail," Mary Ann warned, "the entity will break free. And it won't just take us, it'll take Havenport." Jordan felt useless, standing outside the circle as the warlocks prepared. But Ezra grabbed his hand, pulling him close. "You're my anchor," Ezra whispered. "Your strength keeps me grounded." Jordan's throat tightened. He wasn't sure he believed it, but he nodded, squeezing Ezra's hand. They moved to the cliffs at midnight, the moon casting an eerie glow over the rocks. The ritual began with a low chant, the warlocks' voices weaving together in a haunting melody. Jordan watched, his heart pounding, as the air around them shimmered with power. The amulets glowed, and the ground trembled. But then, the entity struck. A shadow erupted from the cliffs, a writhing mass of darkness that seemed to swallow the light. The warlock's chants faltered, and Caleb cursed, his hands glowing green as he fought to hold the circle. Ezra's face was strained, sweat beading on his forehead. "Jordan," he shouted, "stay back." But Jordan couldn't. He saw the fear in Ezra's eyes, the way his body trembled under the entity's assault. Without thinking, Jordan stepped into the circle, grabbing Ezra's hand. "I'm not leaving you," he said, his voice fierce. The entity roared, its voice shaking the cliffs. "You cannot stop me," it hissed, its form coalescing into a figure cloaked in red, the same figure from Jordan's dreams. Marian shouted for them to keep chanting, but the entity was relentless. It lashed out, sending Caleb sprawling. Ezra's magic flared, but it wasn't enough. Jordan felt the darkness pressing against him, a cold, suffocating weight. But then he remembered the texts he'd read. The entity thrived on fear. Ezra, Jordan said, his voice steady despite the chaos. We're stronger than this. Together. Ezra's eyes met his, and for a moment, the world stilled. They held on to each other, their love a defiant light against the darkness. Ezra's magic surged, purple light weaving with Caleb's green and Marianne's silver. The entity screamed, its form flickering. But the ritual wasn't complete. Marian shouted that they needed to sacrifice a piece of their power. Ezra hesitated, his eyes locked on Jordan. If I do this, he said, I might lose my magic forever. Jordan's heart ached, but he nodded. You're more than your magic, he said. You're enough. Ezra closed his eyes, his hands glowing brighter as he poured his power into the circle. Caleb and Marian followed, their voices rising in a final, desperate chant. The entity writhed, its screams deafening, but the warlocks held firm. Jordan stood by Ezra, his presence a quiet strength. With a final burst of light, the entity shattered, its form dissolving into the night. The cliffs fell silent, the air still. Ezra collapsed, and Jordan caught him, holding him close. It's over, Jordan whispered, his voice thick with relief. But it wasn't over. Marianne's face was grim as she checked the amulets. The seal is weak, she said. We've contained it, but it's not gone. Caleb cursed, kicking a rock into the sea. What the hell does that mean? He demanded. Marianne's eyes were heavy. It means we've bought time, but it'll come back. Jordan looked at Ezra, whose face was pale but resolute. We'll be ready, Ezra said, his hand finding Jordan's. But as they walked back to town, Jordan couldn't shake the feeling that the darkness was still watching, waiting for its chance to strike again. The ritual's aftermath left Jordan and Ezra clinging to each other, their love a fragile anchor in a storm of uncertainty. The cliffs were quiet now, but the air felt charged, as if the entity's presence lingered like a bruise on the world. Jordan couldn't stop thinking about Ezra's sacrifice. His magic, once a vibrant part of him, was now a faint flicker. Ezra was different after the ritual. He was quieter, his smiles rarer, as if the loss of his power had carved out a piece of his soul. Jordan tried to fill the void with love, cooking Ezra's favorite meals, planning quiet nights by the ocean. But the weight of what they'd faced, and what was still coming, hung over them like a storm cloud. Caleb, true to his word, demanded his new life. Jordan and Ezra pooled their resources, helping him secure a fake ID and a one-way ticket to Seattle. Don't look for me, Caleb said as he left, his green eyes softer now. And don't screw this up. He nodded at Jordan and Ezra's clasped hands, a rare smile breaking through his gruff exterior. Marianne stayed in Havenport, teaching Ezra how to live without his magic. You're still a warlock, she told him. Power or no power, it's in your blood. But Ezra struggled, his confidence shaken. Jordan watched him wrestle with his identity, and it broke his heart. You don't need magic to be extraordinary, Jordan told him one night, their foreheads pressed together. Ezra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. What if I'm not enough without it? He whispered. Jordan kissed him fiercely. You're everything. But the entity wasn't done with them. Jordan began noticing signs, flickering streetlights, whispers in the wind, and a chill that followed him even in the warmest rooms. He didn't tell Ezra, not wanting to add to his burden, but the fear gnawed at him. One night, while Ezra slept, Jordan returned to the library, poring over the texts they'd studied. He found a passage about the entity's origin. It wasn't just a force. It was a manifestation of Silas's betrayal, a living curse that fed on division. Jordan realized the entity's weakness wasn't just unity, it was love. The text described a final ritual, one that could banish the entity for good, but it required a bond stronger than magic. Jordan's heart raced as he read the words. A heart given freely, unbroken by fear. He knew what he had to do, but the thought terrified him. He told Ezra the next morning, showing him the passage. Ezra's face paled. This ritual, it's dangerous, he said. It could kill you. Jordan shook his head. I'm not letting you face this alone. We're in this together, remember? Ezra pulled him into a desperate embrace, his voice breaking. "I don't deserve you," he said. Jordan smiled, brushing a strand of hair from Ezra's face. "You're stuck with me." They planned the final ritual with Marianne's help, returning to the cliffs under a full moon. The air was heavy, the waves crashing violently below. Marianne warned them that the entity would fight harder this time, sensing its end. "Stay connected," she said, her eyes on Jordan. "Your love is the key." As they began the ritual, Jordan stood at the center, holding Ezra's hand. Marianne chanted, her silver light weaving around them. The entity emerged, its form more solid now. A towering figure cloaked in red, its eyes burning with malice. "You cannot win," it roared, its voice shaking the ground. Jordan's knees buckled, but Ezra's grip kept him steady. The entity lashed out, its darkness wrapping around Jordan like a vice. He felt its hatred, its hunger, but he focused on Ezra, on the warmth of his hand, the love in his eyes. "I love you," Jordan said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Ezra's eyes widened, and he squeezed Jordan's hand. "I love you too," he said, his voice steady despite the storm. Their words were a spark, igniting the ritual's power. The entity screamed, its form unraveling as their love burned through its darkness. Marianne's chant grew louder, and the cliffs glowed with a light that wasn't magic. It was something deeper, something human. With a final, ear-splitting wail, the entity dissolved, its remnants scattering into the wind. Jordan collapsed, Ezra catching him as they sank to the ground. Marianne nodded, her face weary but relieved. "It's gone," she said. "For good this time." Jordan and Ezra held each other, their breaths ragged but their hearts full. They'd faced the impossible and won, not with magic, but with love. As the moon shone above, Jordan knew they'd never be the same, but they'd be together, and that was enough. The cliffs of Havenport stood silent now, their secrets buried beneath the waves. Jordan and Ezra moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place where the ocean's song was a constant reminder of what they'd overcome. The entity was gone, but its shadow lingered in their quiet moments, a reminder of how close they'd come to losing everything. Ezra struggled to adjust to life without his magic. Some days, he'd stare at his hands, as if expecting them to glow again. Jordan was there through it all, patient and unwavering. They built a routine, mornings at the cauldron's brew, evenings cooking dinner together, nights tangled in each other's arms. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Marianne became a fixture in their lives, a mentor and friend. She taught Ezra about the history of warlocks, not as a source of power, but as a legacy of resilience. "You don't need magic to be strong," she told him. "You proved that." Ezra smiled, a real smile, and Jordan felt a warmth that rivaled any spell. Havenport slowly returned to normal, its residents unaware of the battle that had saved them. Jordan and Ezra kept their story quiet, a private victory shared only with Marianne. But the town felt different now, lighter, as if the cliffs had exhaled a long-held breath. One evening, as they walked along the beach, Ezra stopped, pulling Jordan close. The sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and pink, a mirror of their first walk together. "I was afraid I'd lose you," Ezra said, his voice soft. "Not to the entity, but to my own darkness." Jordan cupped his face, his thumb brushing Ezra's cheek. "You'll never lose me," he said. "We're stronger than fear." Ezra kissed him, slow and deep, their love a promise etched in the sand. Jordan knew there would be challenges ahead. Life wasn't a fairy tale, and their scars ran deep. But they'd face the impossible and come out whole, not because of magic, but because of each other. As they stood together, the ocean stretching endlessly before them, Jordan felt a profound gratitude. Love wasn't just a feeling, it was a choice, a fight, a victory. They'd battled darkness and won, not with power, but with trust, courage, and an unbreakable bond. Havenport's cliffs would always hold secrets, but Jordan and Ezra had created their own story, one of love that defied fear, of two hearts that refused to break. And as the stars emerged above, Jordan knew they'd face whatever came next, together, forever unafraid.